Hi, how are you? It's Maurice. I hope that you're surviving all this lockdown and problems okay. I just want to talk about a couple of things. The tennis news about the French Open, the US Open that here going on. First of all, the French Open, what they are trying to do, they are asked to delay their French Open from a date of September 20 to starting September 27, ending on October 11, with the previous schedule. The final was due to end on the 4th of October. They're doing this due to the ATP Tour has requested it, because with the current US Open ending on September the 13th, it gives people 2 weeks break if they wanted, and also a small clay court season with those 2 weeks in Madrid and Rome to be played in those 2 weeks. So the day after the US Open, Madrid to start, and then Rome. So to have to play 2 weeks in the US Open, then 2 weeks of Madrid and Rome, another 2 weeks at another Grand Slam, the French Open, is a bit rough. So what they want to do right now is they want to actually start the US Open 2 weeks earlier, and then have Toronto the last week of July, and then the first week of August Cincinnati, then a week off, then 2 weeks of the US Open, which would now start on the 17th of August, ending on the 30th of August, then a week off. Then you can have your 2 weeks in a row in Madrid and Rome, then another week off, and then the French Open, 27th of September to the 11th of October. That's it, yeah. So that's what they would like to do. But they don't usually start the US Open build up Toronto and Cincinnati Masters due to they've had the French Open and Wimbledon back to back, a long clay season. People need a month off, but now you're coming off a long break. So why not play in the middle of summer, late July, if you can play? And that's going to give the break, like I said, them starting earlier where there would usually be nothing, then get the US Open 2 weeks early, playing the US Open in summer, August. There's no problem with that. Um, so that's what they want to do if they can, if they're ready to play at that point, which would give you a week break after the US Open, as I said, to a small September clay court season with Madrid and Rome still going off. Then you got your week off, and then you got the French Open September 27 now to October 11. So you get both of the two Grand Slams, the US Open and the French Open, now have two Masters 1000 on that surface, on that continent, building up towards it. So I just think that this is like a good idea, and playing it earlier. If they're ready with the coronavirus situation, why not start it earlier? Like I said, you don't need a break after the French Open and Wimbledon didn't happen. You're coming off months off, and you're fresh. So if that all works out, and the last week of July, you're ready to go at Toronto with all these problems, then that's a good situation. You lose one Grand Slam, you lose three Masters of Thousands, so you've got six of the nine Masters of Thousands, three of the four Grand Slams, as Australian Open is already over. So that would be a good situation. Now, that's if everything goes well and goes to plan. That's what they're working on right now at the ATP Tour, the ITF, the Grand Slams. That's the plan. So what's going to happen if it's not going to go to plan? So the French Open, they can't delay it any later than September the 27th start. So it's either going to be ready to go or not. It's going to be too cold. It's an outdoor tournament. Whereas the US, being a much bigger country than France with climatic conditions ranging, the if the US Open can't go on, of course they want to start it earlier, but if it can't start earlier and then it can't start on the original date of October 31, they may consider doing it after the French Open, maybe sort of late the last 2 weeks of October. That would be the last time in New York you can play outdoors, so that may be a consideration. But if that's still not possible, then the next thing is um, late November, early October to move it to the Indian Wells location. It's still in the US. biggest tennis center in second biggest tennis center in the US. 16,000 seats on center court. So that's bigger than the other three Grand Slams outside of the US Open. So they're considering a venue change. Like I said, if they wouldn't be ready to play until November or December, if you delay, there's no point in delaying it past New Year's because then you can't hold two US Opens in 1 year. But to still have the 2020 edition, it has to be finished before New Year's Eve. So they can push their planning if they need to push it all the way back to November or even December and hold it at Indian Wells. But to still hold it in New York, you're looking at last 2 weeks of October, the last possibility for that. So I've given you sort of the idea. If everything goes to plan, like I said, late July, Toronto, Cincinnati, first week of August, then a week off and 2 weeks at the US Open, then a week off, 2 weeks, Madrid and Rome, then a week off the French Open, September 27. And if things don't go to plan, pushing the French Open, September 27, the later it can be pushed back, and it's either going to happen or not. Still playing in New York for the US Open last 2 weeks of October. Then, if that doesn't happen, late November, early December in Palm Springs, and pushing it all the way back to finishing perhaps, if necessary, a few days before Christmas, the last Sunday before Christmas Day, with 2 weeks leading up in Indian Wells. That's the latest they can push it. They can still play outdoors then and not miss the US Open, and they've still technically done the 2020 edition. But if it's past Christmas, New Year, then it's the 2021 and you can't play it twice. So it's just a cancellation. But they're willing to do whatever it happens, whatever they can do to hold the US Open, and whatever they can do to hold the French Open. They're desperate. Wimbledon, I spoke about in earlier videos, they have an insurance policy. They're like, if it's not easy and it can't be done on the exact date, they just don't want to bother. They want to claim the insurance check, which will give them 100 million British pounds. So that's what they're doing. But the French Open, US Open, very desperate situation. The US Open, if it's not held this year, would have to sack half of the staff on the USTA. And then the French Open, same thing, very desperate. They built their roof. They've got a loan for the roof, which they're going to pay back with the 2020 US Open revenue from broadcasting, ticket sales, and all of these things. So both of them are desperate, and both of them are going to be in huge financial hardship if it's not held. The advantage for the US Open is it's 50 states in the US. So even though it's scheduled in New York and they want it there, they're willing to do whatever it is and hold it in any of the 50 states to get it done, to get it on, to stop the financial loss. Whereas being an outdoor tournament, France can't really do that. And they don't have different climates. The furthest they could go is down to the south of France, but perhaps they could, this has not been talked about yet, but I'm just saying it, perhaps the French Open could be at the Monte Carlo venue. And it's officially actually in France, not Monte Carlo, and there it'd be warm later, so maybe they could push it to sort of mid-October if need be. But they'll be desperate and they'll do anything to have that too. So yeah, that's what I want to say. Sorry, I don't know if I was interrupted or you had any problem. I just got a message from YouTube about an unstable connection. So just in case, I'll just repeat my last point. The French Open could, if they wanted to, which they will want to do, move to Monte Carlo because in France and hold it there, but that's not something talked about. They're willing to play at the original French Roland Garros until as late as the September 27 start. And if there's no problems, even if the US Open is cancelled, they'll play there. US Open will go after that, and then even push to November, December in Indian Wells, and still be a US Open, but give up the idea of being in New York. Late October, they can still play in New York. But right now, the best sort of plan that we that we're going to do and that they want to do is, like I said, late July in Toronto, first week of August in Cincinnati, and then US Open the 17th of August to the 30th, and then a week off, and then around the 7th of September, Madrid, the next week Rome, then the week off where there'll be qualification for the French Open, then the French Open September 27 to October 11. Now, there is one thing that if they can't move the US Open before the current date of August 31 to September 13, they'll pack it all together. The following week after the US Open, there'll be the Madrid Masters and the Rome Masters. Then the week after that, you'll have 2 weeks at the French Open, still September 27 to October 11. But they don't want that. They want to start the US season earlier in late July and get some sort of breaks and get a better schedule. And then I've went over the US Open can go as late October. The French Open can't go any later than this at Roland Garros, but could move to Monte Carlo sort of late October up to early November. If not, it'll have to be cancelled. And the US Open can go as late if they're willing to leave New York. It's a plan B, late November, early December, anytime finishing the last Sunday before Christmas. If you don't finish it this year, obviously it's cancelled, and then they'll just go for the normal days of the 2021 edition. So these are the current plans depending on when they're ready to play. I would say we're past the peak right now. And I would say that there's a good chance we could have a late July start in Toronto with those breaks. Week off before the US Open, week off between US Open, Madrid and Rome back to back, and then a week off before the French Open starting on September 27. I'd say we've got a great chance of that. But that's the possible scenarios depending on when the tennis season is ready to start up again. My next video is going to be about the GOAT debate, greatest of all time. I think Rod Laver's a candidate, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Pete Sampras, and others. And the tennis surfaces obviously plays an impact. Who got to play more on their best surface, all that. I'm going to make that video very soon this week. And I hope you guys are surviving this situation. And let's hope that the first best option, where they're going to start with the Toronto Masters at the end of July. Let's hope that that's going to happen and survive this situation. Everything's going to get better and be great. Please subscribe to my channel and check back and do the bell notification. And I'll speak to you soon on the next video about the GOAT debate of tennis and tennis surfaces. Have a great day or night, depending wherever you are in the world. And I'll speak soon. I'll be ready to record another video. Okay, bye, subscribe, thanks.